Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Let me try to deal with some of these questions as well. Who calls the shots? Well, I think it's always been a mistake for people around him to underestimate President Bashir. He has solidified his control. He's managed to move people around when they get too powerful. Not long ago, he dismissed two very powerful people, Vice President Taha and Nafi al-Nafi, and who knows, they may come back 6 months from now. They were both very powerful people. There are two military organizations. There's the regular military, and there's the NIS, which controls the militias, the so-called Janjaweed. Now it's called the Rapid, what's it called, the RDF or whatever it's called. So you have power centers there, all of which the president uses to, frankly, maintain his own position, protect his own interests, etc. Now he's appointed a prime minister, Prime Minister Bakri. Bakri is someone very close to the president. I think he feels that Bakri is someone who will also protect his interests. So you have an autocratic system, but with someone who plays powerful interests against each other. Now, it also is true, going into another question, that there are people with different opinions about where the country ought to go. There are a number of people who understand that the system that they've been operating for a long time, where you keep the outlying areas at bay through fighting, through co-optation, through exploitation, whatever, keep the power at the center, is draining the country and will keep draining the country. And there are people like former Minister Ghazi and others who have spoken out on this and written about how to democratize the country, et cetera. There are people who want a better relationship with the United States and understand. There are other people who feel very, very differently, that all our talk about human rights and peace is a danger to the security of the regime. And as long as they consider human rights and accommodation a danger to the security of the regime, they're going to fight against it. And the difficulty for us outsiders is, how do you engage in that situation? And you try and engage, encouraging the people who are thinking differently and trying to counter the arguments of those on the other side. And it's going to be slow, and it's going to be a very difficult process, and we have to keep working it. Now, the origin of the EO, actually, it's a product of about 2.5 years of debate inside the administration. First, whether we should have such a dialogue at all, whether the Sudanese were open to it. And you have to remember that my successor, Don Booth, couldn't get a visa to Sudan for over a year. So the question was, how do you relate? So it was a long, tough debate. And then toward the end, what are the elements of the debate? Got to the end of the administration. They put it out there, and I realized it puts suddenly something on the next administration. I think the 6 months is because these are very limited conditions, very limited benchmarks. And if you had them out there for a year, it could last but not move you any farther. At least that's my interpretation. You have to ask the people. Now, I'd like to talk a little bit more about humanitarian access, because some of us for many years have been fighting this issue over humanitarian access, and others have, et cetera. But it's been a political football by both sides, okay? Sometimes the opposition says that's our #1 concern, and sometimes they say, well, it has to be linked to the political dialogue. There are people in the government who don't want humanitarian access because they do believe that, without it, it weakens the opposition. They're also afraid of weapons coming in and all of that. But we got very close to an agreement on I'd say, under Thabo Mbeki, very close to an agreement on humanitarian access. And the opposition said, okay, we're all for it, except it has to come, at least some of it has to come from Ethiopia. It can't just all come from Sudan. Now, you can argue as whether you think that was a worthwhile condition to hold it all up. The government didn't agree with that, and both of them are playing games because it's related to whether they're really willing to move beyond that to a political dialogue. And the people who suffer are the people in the two areas. And I'm personally unsympathetic with both sides on this particular issue, but it does go to the complexity of the negotiations. Humanitarian access, really has to be linked to an understanding in the two areas that it's not a one-time thing. It's got to be part of a process where you have a cessation of hostilities and have a political process. If it's a one-time thing, it'll break up in 6 months and it won't accomplish more than that immediate.
Piggybacking on some of your comments, I agree, and that the ceasefire and the humanitarian assistance are got to be linked for it to last, and I think that's the justification. I mean, we've seen some hope because the fighting is really slowed or ceased, and for me, we do need to try to give peace a chance. Unfortunately, we have to incentivize Khartoum. I also think Khartoum has played America very well. I mean, they're very good poker players. I wouldn't go to a casino if they were dealing. And that is respect for their intellect and their capability in as far as Bashir and the people who's got in power. I think that they assume that we forget. I think that they can overwhelm us with problems and complexities. But at the end of the day, I do agree. I think that who's still in power? Mr. Bashir. I mean, Hassan al-Turabi, who was, the intellectual behind in the power, the brains, whatever you call it, behind the National Islamic Front when they took over, when Bashir and he took over power in 1989. Well, he's dead. Mr. Bashir's still in power, and I've heard anecdotally from other people who have been close to Mr. Bashir that he knows what he's doing. He knows the people around him. He knows very well how to play each other off of each other and how to stay in power. I also think that we do need to look at their actions, not what they say. I mean, they'll say what we want to hear. I think they'll say to diplomats what we want to hear, and smart diplomats and wise diplomats like Ambassador Lyman know that. But we have to, like, for instance, religious freedom, okay? I mean, that's often, I don't know, Mr. Wolf said it, you said it, but it's a canary in the coal mine, particularly in regions like Khartoum and the issues that are going on there. And all we have to do is look at the past several months. The Czech pastor who was arrested, complicated reasons why. I mean, he snuck into the mountains, took footage. They caught him when he was in Khartoum, not the smartest thing to do. And but then they arrested 2 Sudanese pastors who evidently were at a religious freedom conference in Addis. The intelligence network for Khartoum were there videotaping it, like they're probably in the crowd here videotaping this. And so they locked them up when they went back to Khartoum. So for me, the nature of that, let's call it a government, a regime, is that they're fundamentally, I don't think, believe in religious freedom. Hassan Turabi changed his tune about 10 years ago, started writing about religious freedom, and because we were down there talking to him, other people were talking to him, so he thought, I can curry favor with the West. But I think you have to look back to the 90s with what they did and to justify their violent and militant attacks against America and our allies. And the type of people that are willing to do that and are still in power, what are they really about? And I think we need to know that. Now, we also need to give peace a chance. We can't just forget it and walk away. And we're signatories and we led the peace process with President Bush for the South and for the Sudan, and we have a moral obligation, but it's also in our security interest to do so. You had asked about the humanitarian assistance, if anything's gone in through the battle lines, and to my knowledge, no. Across the front lines, no. Ambassador Lyman, I think, already touched on some of the rationale behind it. I've heard that the opposition looked at what happened in Darfur and they said, no way, we're not allowing that to happen again. I don't know all the details of what happened in Darfur, but I've heard that security really monitored, not to monitor, but controlled what was going on, what was going on out. And I know that, like in a lot of other countries, not just in Sudan, but Sudan looks at refugees as a security issue. And you don't know which aid workers, the Red Crescent or whoever else like that, is working for their intelligence service or for some security apparatus there. You know, if you walk as a Catholic bishop or a Catholic priest with a truckload of grain or something like that, whatever, that's just pure humanitarian goods to go in, I mean, the chances of you getting that through, in my opinion, would be, all of it through would be slim. So on the refugee situation, specifically to Eritrea that I wrote about, I had a European official who works on refugee officials issues tell me. I said, you have a lot of Eritrean refugees coming here to Europe. You must be excited about that, or what have you. And he's like, no, we're not. And we don't want them. They can't speak any. They're very unskilled, very uneducated. They are traumatized from what happened to them when they had to serve in the military. And the report that you all did it enough. I mean, it catalogs this. The Europeans don't want the Eritreans coming because they're a threat to their society to have them there, because they could be lawless, uncontrollable, and that sort of thing. Lastly, I think that I have great respect. I've never served as a special envoy. The pressures that are there are, and the kind of work that you have to do, very difficult. I think that Special Envoy Booth, I didn't understand it, but he's sort of in a very cerebral, smart, but I think he sort of lost control when he was at the USIP giving comments before he left. And he singled out the SPLM North in particular and blamed them for the humanitarian assistance agreement falling apart. I don't think envoys should do that very often. And I think what he said was, these people, and he also was referring to all of the leaders are serving themselves more than their people. But then, as Ambassador Lyman said in his remarks, the SPLM North itself is having some issues right now. I mean, one of the top figures wants self-determination, to ill-defined, whereas some of the others say, no, that's not, we belong as a unified, kind of John Garang's vision of a new Sudan, democratic participation. And so I felt like that they were pushing so hard for whatever reason, maybe for Mr. Obama's legacy. I don't understand why, but I think that whoever takes over as envoy, whoever inherits this portfolio within the Trump administration is going to have to walk some of that back. The other thing, I've said it before, but we have a lot of dedicated career professionals in the State Department and all over, but right now our Africa policy and our Sudan and South Sudan policy is rudderless, and it won't have a rudder until Mr. Trump gets his people in the key positions. And so I don't think, if I were Khartoum or if I were the opposition members, I wouldn't, if I got an email from or a conversation from somebody in the State Department right now, I wouldn't pay any attention to it. I would say, put a Trump person in there and I'll deal with you. It'd be the same if it was a Democrat administration. You've got to have your own people in to do the work and have some guidance from the top in order to have the credibility and to get some things done. So I think we're in a real holding pattern. That's another reason why I suggest 180 days long or a year, because it's going to take a few more months till we get some key people in at the White House and in the bureaucracy to handle these issues.